They gathered in the small law office like witnesses to a storm, while Lagos rain drummed its stubborn beat on the tin roof and the Atlantic wind pried at the windows. Amara sat straight-backed in her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, the metal braces on her legs catching the light like silent bells. The room smelled of paper and ripe guava. A framed map of Georgia hung beside a woven raffia mat from Abia. The lawyer liked to remind people that wealth lives in two places at once, the bank and the blood. "Ms. Amara Nanana Johnson," said Attorney Okoye, lifting a heavy envelope with a seal the color of cola. "By the last will and covenant of Chief Obasi. Nana, your grandfather, you are sole heir to his American trust and African holdings, estimated at $100 million. The air thinned. A fly changed its mind and veered away from the fruit tray. The clock's tick pronounced each second, loud as a ceremonial drum. A junior clerk gasped, clapping a palm over her mouth. In the courtyard, a hawker selling puff-puff went quiet mid-chant. Amara's throat tightened against a heat that rose from the center of her chest. The man who raised her from afar, whose photographs sat like saints on the mantel in her mother's rented apartment in Atlanta, had indeed been a thundercloud. But this? Her breath shook. Her fingers found the smooth wooden beads tied to her wrist, Mama Adazi's beads, a bracelet of "Come Back Home" that her grandmother had made the night before Amara left for university. The lawyer kept speaking, the words tumbling into the room. Trust protects principal, distribution schedule, a foundation to be formed in her name. But the syllables skimmed over her, a low tide over oyster shells. At the edge of her vision, ghosts arranged themselves. The woman she was last year, walking fast through the market. The woman she became 2 months ago. Waking to metal and white light and a body that refused her commands. The woman she was, at this table now. 3 sisters stared at one another and said nothing. Then the office door banged open so hard, the frame rattled. Deshawn filled the doorway, rain slick and breathing like he had sprinted through a hurricane. His shirt clung to his shoulders, his jaw worked. The man who had left Amara on a Tuesday morning with a sentence that broke more than vows, "I can't carry this burden, not when you can't even feed us," was standing in front of her as if the ocean had returned a body to shore. Behind him, a woman in a cream suit steadied an umbrella and stepped in too. Her stilettos clicked against the tile, her eyes sharp as fish knives. Some people wore money like perfume. She wore it like armor. Monique, his boss. The boss who became the reason he had stopped coming home early, then stopped coming home at all. The boss who gave him rides in a black car and posted pictures of dinners under blue city lights. Attorney Okoye raised his chin. "This is a private reading." "We need 2 minutes," Deshawn said, eyes fixed on Amara's face. Water fell from his cuff and slipped down to the floor. "You had all the minutes," the junior clerk muttered to the papers. Monique stepped forward, lifted a sleek brown envelope, and laid it on the table like a chess move. "Before anyone signs anything, Ms. Johnson should see this." It sounded like a threat and a gift at once. Amara reached, slow and steady, as if the envelope were a living thing that could bite. Her fingertips touched the edge. She looked up at Deshawn, at the man whose last words to her had been a door closing. His mouth opened, closed. Whatever he had come to say, the rain swallowed it. "Open it," Monique said softly, "if you want truth." The clock ticked 3 times. The room held its breath. Amara broke the seal, and the scene shattered like a calabash dropped on stone, scattering us backward in time to the start of a road that led to this office with its old rain and new money. Long before the brown envelope and the whisper of a fortune, there was the scent of butter and heat and the thrum of a city that belonged to both continents. Atlanta on a Saturday morning wore the color of plantains frying and the music of vendors claiming corners. At the curb outside the West End Market, Amara's food truck, Mama Ada's kitchen, sat like a promise with wheels. She had painted it herself in bold oranges and greens, the lettering hand-drawn with the care of a prayer. "Yo, you got extra suya spice today?" called a kid with a skateboard, voice cracking in adolescence. "Always," she sang back, flipping a jollof stuffed empanada with the wrist of a maestro. Heat painted her face. Sweat curled the baby hairs at her temples. Her white apron carried a history of stains like a family tree. People lined up for her food, the way some people line up for blessings. She fed the city with her hands, and they fed her with their money and their stories. And at night she counted both with equal thanks. Deshaun arrived just as the lunch rush softened, his smile wide, his hands empty. He walked that line between swagger and boyish charm like it was a tightrope he'd been born upon. "You're a star," he said, kissing the crown of her head, hand grazing her waist like it was his favorite place to park. "Stars sleep, at least a little," Amara laughed, and handed him a tray to pass to an office worker in a blue shirt. "Help me before the bankers revolt." He failed at being graceful, but he tried, and his trying made him look golden. He wore cologne that said optimism. He wore sneakers that cost too much. He wore a dream of starting a consulting firm once the right investor saw what he could do. He had spreadsheets and slogans, and his words floated like lanterns at a festival. Some nights they danced together in the kitchen after closing, slipping on flour, laughing like they were young and free. Some mornings they ate leftover puff-puff with coffee on the steps, watching the neighborhood stretch and yawn. He called her Miracle. She called him home. But home is more than a place you unlock with a key. Home is a pattern we walk again and again until the rug wears thin. The first time the landlord raised the rent at the spot by $100, Deshaun said, "Don't worry, baby, I got you." The second time he said, "Your truck's doing numbers, right? You'll cover it." The third time he said nothing and didn't look up when she slid the cash across the table. He was chasing a deal then with a woman who wore cream suits and shoes that clicked like judgment. Monique owned a boutique marketing firm that made small brands look large and lost men look found. She liked to say she believed in potential the way mothers believe in babies, without proof, with everything. She and Amara met once at a networking mixer. Monique's gaze lingered on the truck's logo as if she could brand it with her eyes. "We could take this national," she said, and Amara smiled politely and poured her more ginger juice. Deshaun began to stay out late, his phone turning over like a seashell on the nightstand, its face down to the wood. Amara fed him anyway. Hunger is honest even when people aren't. When the bottom shelf of the pantry went empty, she lined it with jars of promises because her grandmother had told her that shelves don't like to be naked. They hold bitterness if you make them embarrassed. A jar of ground crayfish, a jar of Cuban oregano, a jar of dried lemons from the auntie next door. She leaned on Proverbs to get through. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. The goat that belongs to many people starves. On the day the world changed, the sun rolled above Atlanta like a hot coin. The market was a river of chatter. Somewhere a trumpet practiced scales. A man on a bicycle wore a tie like a joke. A catering order for a local church's revival came in late. 10 trays of jollof, peppered turkey, puff-puff dusted with powdered sugar. She hustled in and out of the truck like a spinning dancer. 30 minutes until pickup. 20. 10. "Let me drive," Deshaun said, appearing like he'd never been gone. His smile made her think of the early days. "You shouldn't be lifting alone." She looked at him, then at the sky threatening rain. Her back ached, her hands cramped. "Okay," she said. "Keys are in the cup holder." They loaded the trays. She double-checked the lids with the compulsive tenderness of a mother tucking in children. On the road, traffic pulsed. Monique called and asked Deshawn something about a proposal. He grinned and told her, "I'll swing by after this." Swing by after this. The words curled around Amara's heart like vines. The crash did not announce itself like a villain in a play. It came like life often comes, fast, unstyled, without explanation. The light turned green. The black SUV ran the red. The world folded, then unfolded wrong. Metal screamed. So did she. Sound fractured. Smell of smoke. Taste of pennies. Then a blue sky she didn't recognize, and an EMT's voice telling her, "Stay with me, ma'am. Stay with me." In the hospital, pain built a small city and crowned her mayor. Doctors said the words that turned spines into strangers: nerve damage, limited mobility, long rehabilitation. Bills piled like anthills after a storm. The truck went quiet, the grill cold. The vendors who loved her brought soups and song, but people have their own storms, and visitors became memories. Deshawn shifted from bedside angel to ghost in 3 weeks. First he forgot to bring the charger, then he forgot to bring himself. On a Tuesday morning, he stood at the foot of her bed with his hands folded into fists that tried to look like pockets. "I can't carry this burden," he said, eyes on the window, voice flat. "Not when you can't even feed us." She didn't know it was possible for words to break bones. Turns out, hearts have bones too. He was gone before she found a response, taking with him the shared bills, the second pillow, and the photograph of them dancing in flour. 2 a.m. brings coward truths. She whispered into the darkness, "If love is a dance, what song is this?" Her grandmother's voice lifted from memory. "When the masquerade dances, it is not only its power that shines, it is also the patience of the drummer." Patience took the wheel. She learned how to transfer from bed to chair with a grace that made nurses smile. She learned to boil water and set a pot the way you said a prayer. Auntie Ifeoma, the neighbor, showed her stretches and fed her gossip like vitamins. On Sundays, the choir's sound from the church across the street floated up to her window, reminding her that bones remember music even when legs forget. Then the lawyer's letter came, written on creamy paper that made you want to believe it. Chief Obasi Nana, the man who had lived large in 2 countries, who sent school fees in the bad years and tall stories in the good, had slept and not woken. He had left behind houses with stubborn gates, accounts that hummed like bees, lands with histories etched into the soil. He had left an inheritance with conditions and a will thick enough to stop bullets. She rolled into the law office that day in a dress the color of sea glass and a scarf her grandmother had once tied around her hair to hold wisdom in. She told herself that money was not salvation, that the ocean is wide and money is only a canoe. But a canoe still keeps you from drowning. When the words 100 million fell, the room tilted and life unfolded a new map. Then the door opened, and the man who had left her came back wearing wet regret and cologne she recognized, Monique's brand, a smell that had filled their apartment long before the bottle ever did. And Monique, sharp and certain, placed the brown envelope between Amara and the future. "Open it," she had said. So now, in that charged moment where thunder waits to decide whether it will crack open the sky, Amara eased a finger under the flap and slid out a thin stack of photographs, a thumb drive, and a single sheet of paper with a time and date stamped in blue. The photograph on top captured a traffic light at the corner of Ralph David Abernathy and Peoples Street. In the reflection on the window of a nearby barber shop, a black SUV streaked through the frame. Her heart thudded. The second photograph was clearer, still from a different angle. The SUV's front plate showed bright as a confession, A number she knew, a number her nightmares had learned to rhyme with. "What is this?" Attorney Okoye demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. It sounded far away, like a radio in another room. Monique kept her gaze neutral. "Evidence. You deserve to know how you came to be in that chair." Deshawn winced as if struck. "Monique, don't," she said without looking at him. The paper on the table was a log from a private security camera. The time matched the minute of the crash. The thumb drive waited like a small, patient snake. Amara felt the room steady beneath her, as though a storm had passed in one direction, but gathered in another. She thought of her grandmother's proverb. When a toad runs in the daytime, something is after it. She thought of hunger and loyalty, and what we call love when we mistake it for hunger. She thought of the night Deshawn had cried on her kitchen floor after his mother missed his call, and how she had fed him crisp plantains with brown edges and salt. "Play it," she said. The junior clerk inserted the drive into a laptop. The screen glowed, then resolved into a monochrome image of the intersection, the traffic light, the line of cars, and the SUV a beat before the catastrophe. The camera caught a glint on the windshield. It caught a shadow in the driver's seat. It caught the tilt of a baseball cap. Monique's voice was almost tender. "I told you, truth." The SUV shot forward on the red. Headlights flared. The frame blurred and then froze, catching a face half-turned. The cap sat crooked. The jawline was unmistakable if you had traced it once with your finger while the city slept. In the law office, someone whispered a prayer made of vowels. Deshawn took a step back. "This isn't... It's not..." His voice cracked. He swallowed a lifetime. The laptop's audio carried a faint siren, then another, then a chorus. The video ended. Silence opened its mouth and ate the room. Amara reached for the next photograph like a woman drawing a curtain. It was grainy, printed from a different angle, a shot from a convenience store camera down the block. It showed the SUV at the curb 10 minutes before the crash. It showed a man in a black hoodie and a baseball cap talking to someone who stood in shadows. But the angle gave him away. The slope of his shoulders, that slight inward tilt of his left knee, the habitual flex of his right hand. The lawyer's pen rolled off the desk and clattered to the floor. Monique closed the envelope and slid it back to herself with 2 painted fingernails. "He didn't mean to," she said, as if this were a mercy. "But meaning is a small thing under a big sky." "No," Deshawn breathed. "No, no." Amara's head was a drum, the beads on her wrist pressed into her skin like punctuation. The woman who ran the market truck, the woman in the hospital bed, and the woman at the inheritance table reached for one another across time. And their hands met in the middle. "Tell me," she said quietly, turning her eyes to Monique. "Why bring this to me now?" Monique's gaze finally softened. "Because the river remembers its path, even when people pretend otherwise. Because money changes people and reveals them, and I thought you should decide what you want to do before the money chooses for you. Because he told me something last night that made my skin feel wrong." She looked at Deshawn, then away. "And because secrets rot teeth in cities." Attorney Okoye cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson, we can pause the reading of the will. We can call the police. We can..." "Stop," Amara said, and her voice came out like a bell, clean and solid. She held the moment like a bowl and saw that it was full, and that if she didn't drink, it would spill and drown the floor. She looked at the man she had fed and loved and believed. She looked at the woman who had polished him until he shone like someone else's dream. She looked at the fortune that had arrived like a late train, breathless and apologetic. "People say the millipede walks with 1,000 legs and still gets to the market late," her grandmother used to chuckle. But it still gets to the market. Amara leaned forward. The wheel of her chair creaked, an old friend clearing its throat. "Deshaun," she said, "who was in that car with you?" He opened his mouth, shut it, opened it again. On his face, war raged, fear, shame, a child's lostness. The rain on the roof paused, as if the sky itself wished to listen. He whispered a name that made every head in the room snap up. And the lights went out. The power cut with a pop. Darkness swallowed them whole, sudden and fierce, as the storm finally broke open above the roof. In the pitch-black law office, with thunder talking and secrets crossing their arms, a phone flashed on, someone's face lit by that small glow, just in time to catch the shape of a figure at the window. Fingers against glass, a breath fogging the pain. A second envelope pressed to the bars from the outside, tied with a red ribbon like blood turned ceremonial. Lightning stuttered. The figure vanished. In the light of the phone, Amara reached for the window latch with hands that did not tremble. From across the dark, Monique said, "Don't open that." And from somewhere deeper in the storm, a voice, a woman's voice Amara knew in her bones, called her childhood name through the rain. The metal brace on her leg sang a small, frightened note as she froze, every hair on her arms lifting to listen. The room smelled of ozone and old papers. The taped-up map of Georgia rustled. The raffia mat sighed. "Who was in that car with you?" The question hung in the dark like a lantern. Thunder replied, and the old law office trembled as if it had its own secret to confess. The storm had ripped the law office into silence, leaving only the thunder's voice rolling across the roof and the flash of lightning throwing shadows against the walls. The laptop screen had gone dark with the power, and the envelope lay forgotten on the desk, its red ribbon glowing faintly in the light of a single phone screen. Amara sat motionless, her breath shallow. The voice outside, the voice that had called her childhood name, echoed inside her chest like a drumbeat. Few people knew that name. Fewer still dared use it. Only those who remembered her grandmother's compound in Abba, where she once ran barefoot among the goats and cola trees, could have called her that way. Monique's hand rested lightly on the desk, her long nails tapping once. Her tone, low but urgent, cut through the dark. "Don't open that window. Some truths aren't ready to be touched yet." But Amara's eyes did not leave the fogged glass where the stranger had pressed their breath. Her pulse quickened, because if that was truly her grandmother's voice, and Mama Adaze had been buried 6 years ago, then something larger than secrets was knocking at her door. Deshaun stumbled back, his hands clumsy in the dark. "It's not what you think," he muttered, the words spilling like broken beads. "That video, it's twisted. It's not the whole story. You don't know what I had to do." Amara's gaze shifted to him. Her silence was heavier than accusation. The thunder rumbled again, then eased, as if the storm outside had taken a breath. The junior clerk hurried to light a kerosene lantern kept in the corner for outages. Yellow light filled the room, weak and trembling, but enough to reveal faces, each carrying its own battle. Attorney Okoye straightened in his chair, smoothing his tie, his voice regaining some of its authority. "Mr. Johnson," he said, eyes narrowing at Deshaun. "The evidence presented paints a troubling picture. If you are in possession of further information, you will present it now, or the authorities will sort it out." Deshaun shook his head violently. "No, you don't get it. None of you get it. I wasn't alone that day. I wasn't the one behind the wheel." The words fell like stones in water, sending ripples across every face in the room. Monique stiffened. "Then who?" Deshaun hesitated, his jaw clenched and unclenched. "If I say the name, you'll think I'm lying. You'll think I'm trying to save myself. But it's the truth." Amara leaned forward, the lantern light flickering across her face. Then say it. He looked at her, the woman he had once sworn to love, the woman he had abandoned when her legs failed. The woman now sitting before him at the edge of power and fortune. His lips parted, trembling with confession. The driver that day, he whispered, was someone from your own family. The room seemed to tilt. Even the lantern flame bent sideways, flickering violently as though reacting to the revelation. Amara's breath caught, her mind racing back through faces of cousins, uncles, and distant kin who had always lingered around her grandfather's wealth like vultures circling a carcass. She remembered whispers from her mother years ago. Money makes brothers into strangers, and strangers into enemies. But which one of them? Deshaun opened his mouth to continue, when, from outside, another crash split the air. Not thunder this time, but the shattering sound of glass. The junior clerk shrieked, and everyone turned sharply toward the rear of the building. Attorney Okoye rushed to the back door, lantern in hand. The rain had slowed, but the ground outside was littered with shards of window pane. On the wet tiles lay another envelope, this one plain white, no ribbon, soaked through. Whoever had thrown it was already gone, swallowed by the night. Okoye picked it up carefully, dripping water onto the floor. The envelope was marked with just 3 words, scrawled in ink that had bled but was still legible. Don't trust blood. The message sent a chill through every soul in the room. Amara's fingers tightened on the armrest of her wheelchair. She felt the weight of the warning, heavier than the storm, heavier than Deshaun's trembling confession. Her inheritance was no longer just about money. It was about betrayal that ran deeper than marriage, deeper than business, deeper than the grave. And as the lantern flickered again, throwing their shadows long against the walls, she knew the story had only begun. The question that clawed at her chest now was not if she could claim her inheritance, but whether she would survive the truths waiting to be uncovered. And somewhere in the dark outside, the voice that had called her childhood name whispered again, this time softer, closer, like a hand brushing against her ear. Amara, be careful. The lantern sputtered. The room fell still. The chapter closed in silence, with every pair of eyes locked on Amara, waiting for her next move. The lantern's glow flickered and stretched their shadows into giants along the law office walls. Each silhouette warped and trembling as if the room itself knew danger had crept in with the rain. Amara's knuckles pressed pale against the arms of her wheelchair, her breathing shallow but steady. The warning written on that soaked white envelope, "Don't trust blood," throbbed in her mind like a drumbeat she could not silence. Attorney Okoye laid the wet paper carefully on the desk. "This," he said, voice low and measured, "changes everything. Someone knows what is happening in this room. Someone close enough to send messages at the very moment they're needed." Monique crossed her arms, her cream suit stained from the rain, but her poise unshaken. "And someone with a dangerous interest in keeping Ms. Johnson afraid," she added, her eyes narrowing. She turned deliberately to Deshaun. Or perhaps, reminding her of who her enemies truly are. Deshaun's face hardened. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of his own choices had finally settled on him. "Y'all keep pointing fingers at me, but I'm not the one hiding outside in the storm. I'm not the one sending messages." His voice cracked. "I told you, I wasn't driving that SUV. Someone else was, someone from her family." Amara's gaze held him, piercing and unyielding. "Then name them." He opened his mouth, faltered, then swallowed hard. "It was your cousin, Cheek." The name fell into the room like a machete striking stone. Amara's chest tightened. Cheek, her father's brother's son. The cousin who used to carry her on his shoulders during family gatherings in Abba, who always teased her about her accent when she first returned from the States, who had a grin sharp enough to charm goats out of a pen, but also the cousin whose eyes always lingered too long when money was discussed, who once whispered to her mother, "Why should all of Obasi's fortune go to Amara when she didn't even grow up here?" The memory of that bitter sentence stung her now like hot pepper rubbed into an open wound. "Lies," Amara whispered, though the conviction in her voice trembled. "You'll say anything to escape blame." Deshawn stepped forward, desperate. "I swear it. I didn't want to get in the car with him that day, but he insisted. He said he had a way to clear the path for me and you. I thought he meant business, not—" His voice broke. "Not the crash. I wasn't supposed to be there. I told him to slow down, but he—" "Enough," Okoye's voice thundered. "Do you hear yourself, Mr. Johnson? You're accusing your wife's blood of orchestrating an accident that nearly killed her. Do you understand what that means?" Deshawn's jaw tightened. "It wasn't an accident." The silence after those words was unbearable. Even the rain seemed to pause to listen. Monique leaned closer, her perfume sharp in the thick air. "Then what was it?" Deshawn's eyes darted to Amara's, then away. "It was a plan." The lantern sputtered. The clerk gasped. Amara's stomach twisted. She forced her voice to remain calm, though her hands trembled. "A plan to do what?" "To take you out of the picture," Deshawn said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To stop you from inheriting before anyone even knew about the will. Cheek thought if you were gone, everything would pass down to the rest of the family back home. He said it was his birthright, not yours." Amara felt her blood run cold. She remembered her mother's warning from years ago. "Not every smile is kinship, Amara. Some relatives hide knives behind their teeth." But could Cheek truly have gone that far? To arrange an accident that left her crippled? Before she could answer her own thoughts, the kerosene lantern sputtered again, and this time it went out completely, plunging them back into darkness. The room filled with the raw smell of burnt wick. The clerk yelped, fumbling for matches. Okoye cursed under his breath. Then, from the far side of the room, a sharp metallic click echoed through the dark. Not thunder, not glass. A sound every ear in that room recognized instantly. A gun being cocked. "Stay very still," a voice said from the shadows. Amara froze. The voice was deep, rough, and unmistakably familiar. She had heard it laugh in village courtyards, boast at weddings, argue over bottles of beer. Chike. The match finally flared, weak and small, enough to cast a glow across the intruder's face. And there he stood, drenched from the storm, pistol steady in his hand, eyes sharp with a madness that looked too much like desperation. Deshawn stumbled backward, his face pale. "Cheek, what are you—" "Shut your mouth," Cheek snapped, his tone venom. His gaze moved to Amara, cold and furious. "Granddaughter of Obasi, the favorite, the one who was chosen." "Chike," Amara whispered, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. "Why?" "Because you were never meant to have it," he spat. $100 million. That was supposed to stay in the family, in our hands, not wasted on someone who doesn't even have legs to stand on. The cruelty of the words cut through the room like lightning. "Cheek," Okoye said carefully, raising his hands. "You don't have to do this." But Cheek's jaw clenched, his finger tightened on the trigger. "I've come too far to stop now. The money is mine. It always should have been mine." The rain outside grew heavier again, hammering against the roof in a relentless rhythm. The shadows thickened. Everyone's breath grew short. And then Cheek's eyes fixed on the desk, the soaked white envelope with the words, "Don't trust blood." His face twisted, rage flashing across his features. "Who gave you that?" he barked. No one answered. The silence only fed his fury. He took a step forward, the gun steady, the storm raging behind him. Tell me who gave you that envelope, he demanded, or I swear I'll... The office door burst open with a crash, and a figure cloaked in dripping fabric stepped inside, holding something long and heavy in their hands. Lightning illuminated the newcomer's face, an elderly woman with eyes burning like coals, a face Amara hadn't seen since childhood. The figure raised her staff high and shouted, her voice carrying the weight of generations. Chikinana, drop that weapon before the ancestors themselves strike you down. The room gasped, because standing there, alive and fierce, was Mama Adaize, the grandmother Amara thought had been buried years ago. Do you want me to keep building this confrontation into Chapter 4 with the same pace, 2,000 words? Or do you prefer me to shorten the build-up so we can reach the next shocking turn more quickly? The storm outside roared, as if it were answering to the woman in the doorway. Lightning carved her figure into the walls, her staff lifted high, rain dripping from her wrapper like silver threads. Mama Adaize, Amara's grandmother, stood alive, fierce and unbroken, though everyone in the room knew she had been declared dead and buried 6 years earlier. The gun in Cheek's hand trembled, his bravado cracking. No, this is not possible, he stammered, his eyes wide, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold rain. Your grave, your funeral. I was there. Mama Adaize's voice carried the weight of the ancestors, deep and resonant. A grave can be filled with dirt, but not with spirit. Did you think the earth would keep me when lies still rule the living? You stand here, Nana, spilling blood with your mouth, waving iron like a coward, and you think the ancestors are blind. Her words struck like thunder. The kerosene lantern sputtered back to life with the help of the trembling clerk, casting an orange glow across her stern face. Time seemed to fold. Amara, barely breathing, stared at the woman who had sung lullabies over her cradle, the woman who used to grind pepper in a clay mortar while telling stories of tricksters and kings. Deshawn staggered back, rubbing his eyes as though trying to erase the vision. This isn't real. She's supposed to be dead. We saw the obituary. Monique's gaze narrowed, but she said nothing. Her silence was heavy, calculating, as though pieces of a larger puzzle were finally falling into place. Cheeky tightened his grip on the pistol, his voice breaking. Stay back, old woman. You don't scare me. Mama Adaize lowered her staff slowly, her eyes glowing with a terrifying calm. It is not I you should fear, boy. It is the truth you buried that has come to dig you out. The lawyer, trying to regain control, whispered urgently. Miss Johnson. Amara. We must call the authorities at once. This is beyond inheritance matters. But his words felt small in the charged air. Amara's heart pounded. The betrayal cut deeper now. Her cousin, her own blood, had stood in the shadows of her suffering. Her husband had abandoned her in the wreckage. And here stood her grandmother, alive, carrying truths that none of them yet understood. Grandmother, Amara whispered, her voice trembling. How are you alive? Mama Adaize's eyes softened when they turned to her. Child, the living and the dead walk closer together than you think. The family thought me gone, because it was safer for me to disappear. Too many greedy eyes wanted me silent, but I did not die. I hid. For you. The room froze. For me, Amara echoed, confusion knotting her chest. Yes, Mama Adaize said firmly. Your grandfather knew his wealth would rot the family from inside out if it were not protected. He entrusted me with secrets no grave should carry. Secrets about the inheritance, about the betrayals, about who among us would sell blood for gold. Her eyes flicked to Cheek, whose hand on the pistol now shook visibly. You think money is your right, Chike, Mama Adaize said, her voice rising. But money without honor is a curse. Look at you, standing with death in your hands, willing to cripple your own kin to snatch what is not yours. The ancestors see you. They spit on your greed. Chike snarled, the veins in his neck straining. Enough of your riddles, old woman. If the inheritance is meant for her, then she won't live long enough to claim it. His finger pressed harder against the trigger. Gasps filled the room. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to slow, every sound muffled by the rush of her heartbeat. And then, with a swiftness that defied her years, Mama Adaizi slammed the end of her staff against the floor. The sound reverberated like a drumbeat, shaking dust from the rafters. At that very moment, a lightning bolt split the sky, and thunder boomed so loud the windows rattled in their frames. Chike cried out, stumbling as if the very air had struck him. The gun clattered to the ground, skidding across the tiles until it stopped at Amara's feet. Silence fell. Only the rain dared to speak. Everyone's eyes turned to Amara. Her hands trembled as she stared at the weapon lying before her, black and cold, its shadow stretching toward her chair. For a long moment she did not move. Then she lifted her gaze to Cheek, whose face twisted with panic and fury. To Deshawn, whose betrayal still hung in the air like smoke. To Monique, whose motives remained wrapped in mystery. And finally, to her grandmother, who had returned from the dead, carrying a truth too heavy to ignore. Amara's voice, when it came, was low but steady, filled with a strength she had not felt in months. "If blood cannot be trusted," she said, her eyes never leaving Cheek's, "then I will have to decide who still belongs to me." The thunder rolled again, as if agreeing with her. And in that moment, the real battle for her inheritance had only just begun. Audience engagement prompt, end of chapter 4. Viewers, imagine being in Amara's place, crippled, abandoned, betrayed, and suddenly discovering both an unimaginable inheritance and family plotting against you. What would you have done if your own cousin pointed a gun at you? Have you ever seen family betray one another over money? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think. And if you're gripped by this story so far, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends so you don't miss what happens next. The twists are only just beginning. The gun lay between Amara's wheelchair and the edge of the desk, its black steel reflecting the faint glow of the lantern. No one moved. The storm outside rattled the shutters, as if the sky itself was anxious to see what would happen next. Cheek's chest rose and fell in quick bursts, his eyes darting between the weapon and the old woman who stood so fearlessly before him. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice trembling more with desperation than power. "You can't just come back from the dead and think you'll take everything from me." Mama Adaizi's grip tightened on her staff, her eyes never leaving him. "The dead don't come back, Chike. The truth does, and you have been running from it since the day you betrayed your blood." The clerk whimpered softly, hiding behind the desk, while Attorney Okoye wiped sweat from his brow with a trembling handkerchief. Monique, calm as ever, leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, studying the scene like a strategist, watching pawns stumble across the board. Deshawn broke the silence, his voice unsteady. "Chike, listen. Put the madness away before you do something you can't take back. You already ruined her life once. Don't add murder to it." Chike spun toward him, rage flaring in his eyes. "And you, Deshawn? What are you? A man who abandoned her the moment her legs stopped working. You left her to starve while you ran into another woman's arms. And now you dare talk to me about loyalty?" The words sliced deep, and Amara felt her chest tighten. Though she hated to admit it, Cheek's cruel truth carried weight. Deshawn lowered his gaze, shame flooding his features. Amara forced herself to speak, her voice trembling but firm. "Enough." Every head turned toward her. She did not raise her tone, but the authority in her words silenced the room. "Chike," she said, locking eyes with him, "you think money makes you strong, but it has only made you weak. My grandfather chose me for a reason, not because of my legs, not because of where I grew up, but because he knew greed would consume the rest of you." Her words seemed to sting him worse than any weapon. His lips curled. "You don't deserve it. You don't deserve anything." He lunged toward the gun. Gasps filled the room. Before anyone else could react, Amara's hand shot out, her fingers wrapping around the cold steel. The chair's brakes squeaked as she steadied herself. Cheek froze, stunned by her speed, as if he had forgotten that strength could still live in hands even when legs refused. The barrel pointed upward, shaking in her grip. "Take one more step," Amara said, her voice low, steady, and colder than the storm outside. "And you'll see that being crippled doesn't mean being powerless." The room held its breath. Even the rain seemed to pause. Cheeky raised his hands slowly, but his eyes still burned with rage. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Amara whispered. For a long, heavy moment, the air between them was thick enough to choke. Then Mama Adaeze stepped forward, her staff striking the ground once more. "Amara, child, don't let his evil drag you into darkness. Blood spilled cannot be gathered back." Amara's hands trembled. The weapon felt like fire in her palm. Slowly she lowered it to the desk, her chest heaving with the effort of control. "No," she said. "I won't waste my life proving myself to men who already lost their way." Relief rippled through the room, but Cheek only laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think this is finished? This is only the beginning. That inheritance is cursed, Amara. You'll see. Every hand that touches it will bleed." With that, he turned and bolted toward the back door, vanishing into the storm before anyone could stop him. The sound of his footsteps splashed away into the night, leaving the law office shaken and heavy with dread. Attorney Okoye sank into his chair, wiping his forehead again. We must report this immediately. The authorities must know the danger you are in." But Amara's eyes stayed fixed on her grandmother. "Grandmother," she whispered, "what did you mean when you said you hid from me? What truth are you still carrying?" Mama Adaze's gaze softened, though shadows lingered in her eyes. "Your grandfather's inheritance was not only money, child. It was a test. He knew greed would poison the family, so he placed the wealth in hands he believed were pure. But the truth is—" She paused, her voice dropping lower. "There is more than one heir." The room erupted with gasps. Amara's heart dropped into her stomach. Another heir? Someone else entitled to the fortune? Another battle waiting to be fought? "Who?" Amara demanded, her voice sharp. Mama Adaeze looked at her with sorrow. "The one person you least expect, the one already closest to you." Her eyes shifted slowly towards someone in the room. Amara followed her gaze and froze. The lantern hissed softly, its dim flame stretching the shadows long across the room. Everyone followed Mama Adaeze's gaze, their hearts hammering, their breath caught in their throats. Amara's eyes darted quickly, first to the lawyer, then the clerk, then to Monique, but her grandmother's stare did not waver. It landed on Deshawn, the man who had abandoned her. The husband who had betrayed her. The man who stood dripping rainwater and shame, suddenly caught in the crosshairs of revelation. Deshawn blinked, startled, then shook his head furiously. No, that's impossible. Don't you put this on me. I don't want her money. I don't even... He cut himself off, panic flashing across his eyes. But Mama Adaeze's voice carried a weight that made everyone freeze. Want it or not, it's in your blood. Your grandmother and mine were sisters. Your line and hers share the same root. That makes you family, Deshawn. Whether you like it or not, you too are heir to Obasi's fortune." The air cracked like thunder. Amara's lips parted, but no words came. Her mind raced, stumbling through memory, the way her mother had always been strangely polite whenever Deshawn's family name was mentioned, the hushed stories about relatives who had moved north generations ago, the uncanny familiarity her grandmother had once noted the first time she met him. She had thought it was coincidence. Now it sounded like prophecy. Attorney Okoye adjusted his glasses, his voice trembling with professional disbelief. "If this is true, if Mr. Johnson is indeed blood, then the will must be contested, reinterpreted. The courts—" "Enough of your papers!" Mama Adaze snapped, slamming her staff down. "The ancestors do not care for stamps and seals. They care for truth. And the truth is, the fortune belongs to both of them, Amara and Deshawn, together." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Deshawn's face twisted between shame, shock, and something darker. He ran a hand down his wet face, his voice low. "I never knew. I swear I never knew." Amara's heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to curse, to tell him his blood meant nothing to her after what he had done. But another voice inside whispered caution. If this was true, then her inheritance was not only a blessing, it was a snare. Shared with the very man who had left her broken, it could tear her apart. Monique, who had been silent too long, finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the tile, sharp and deliberate. "Well," she said smoothly, "isn't that convenient? The husband who walked out turns out to be an heir. Perhaps the universe has a cruel sense of humor." Her lips curled into a faint smile, though her eyes gleamed with something more dangerous. "But tell me, Amara, what happens when you're forced to share your fortune with the same man who betrayed you? Would you still trust him?" The question sliced Amara's chest wide open. Deshawn turned toward her, desperation in his eyes. "Amara, listen, whatever the papers say, whatever she says, it doesn't change what I did, I know that. But please believe me. I didn't know about the inheritance. I didn't leave you for money. He faltered, his throat tightening. "I left because I was weak, and I regret it every day." Tears burned Amara's eyes, but she blinked them back. She remembered lying in that hospital bed, waiting for him to show up. Remembered the silence of nights when his side of the bed stayed cold. Regret could not erase abandonment. But before she could answer, a loud crash echoed against the shutters. The clerk shrieked. Everyone turned sharply. Through the slats of the window, a dark figure moved in the rain, circling the building. A shadow with a familiar stride. Cheek. His voice rang out, muffled by the storm but clear enough to chill the room. "Amara, you think you've won. You think a cripple and a traitor can keep Obasi's wealth from me. Blood or not, I'll burn this whole city before I let you take what's mine." The sound of liquid splashing against the wall followed his threat. The sharp stench hit them a moment later. Petrol. Amara's heart lurched. He wasn't bluffing. "Fire," Monique whispered, her eyes wide for once. "He's going to burn us alive." Panic rippled through the room. The clerk scrambled to the far corner. Okoye fumbled for his phone. Cursing the dead battery. Mama Adaeze stood tall, her staff clutched tight, her eyes blazing with the fury of a lioness. But it was Amara, sitting in her chair, who felt the weight of decision press hardest on her chest. Her inheritance, her safety, her family's corruption, all of it now balanced on a knife's edge. If Chaik struck a match, everything would be gone. Her grandmother's voice cut through the chaos. "Child, you must choose. Trust the husband fate has tied to your blood, or face this storm alone." "But you cannot delay." The fire is at the door. Amara's hands tightened on the armrests, her heart pounding with the weight of impossible choices. And outside, in the storm's fury, Cheek's laughter carried through the rain, followed by the sharp scratch of a match being struck. The flame flickered to life, and the chapter ended in fire. The match flared against the night, its orange glow licking the rain before sputtering dangerously close to the drenched walls. Through the shutters, the flame painted Chike's face with a madness that chilled every soul inside. His grin was wide, defiant, and desperate, the face of a man who had lost everything but still believed destruction could make him whole. "Chike," Attorney Okoye shouted, his voice trembling. "Think about what you're doing. You'll kill us all." But Chike only laughed, the sound raw and jagged. "Then the ancestors can watch the ashes. If I can't have the inheritance, no one will. Money means nothing when blood has betrayed me." Inside the office, panic rippled like fire across dry grass. The clerk sobbed in the corner. Monique backed away from the windows, her usual composure cracking. Deshawn pressed against the wall, torn between fear and some flicker of responsibility. Amara sat rooted in her chair, her pulse racing, her body rigid. Fire, hungry, merciless, was seconds away from swallowing everything she had left. Her fortune, her truth, her grandmother's return. Gone in smoke if she didn't act. "Child," Mama Adaeze said firmly, her staff glowing faintly in the lantern's flicker. "Look at me." Amara tore her gaze from the flames outside and met her grandmother's eyes. They burned with something stronger than fear. "Your strength is not gone because your legs are gone. The storm tests you because you were born to endure. Decide now. Do you fight for what is yours, or do you let the fire claim it?" The words struck deep. Amara's throat tightened. Her whole life, she had been told she was fragile, too American for her Nigerian roots, too Nigerian for her American peers, now too broken to stand tall. But at that moment, she realized she had endured abandonment, betrayal, lies, and near death. Fire would not have her without a fight. She drew in a steady breath, her voice strong. "We fight." The room hushed, even the storm seemed to pause. Deshawn moved forward uncertainly, his eyes locked on her. "Amara, if we fight, then we fight together. Please let me prove I'm not the man who left you." Her eyes flicked to him, cold and guarded. The man was her husband, her betrayer, and now, shockingly, her blood. Could she trust him, or would his weakness doom her again? Before she could answer, Chick's voice boomed from outside. "Goodbye, cousin." He dropped the lit match toward the wall, petrol glistening in the rain. The flames leapt instantly, bright and violent, crawling up the wood like snakes. Heat pressed against the glass, smoke curling through the cracks. Screams erupted inside the room. Okoye and the clerk scrambled for the door, only to find it jammed. The handle rattled uselessly. "We're trapped," the clerk wailed. Monique, her calm finally fractured, turned toward Amara. "If you don't stop him, you lose everything. That money, that legacy, it all dies here." The fire roared louder, feeding on the storm's fury. Cheek's shadow danced in the blaze, his laughter echoing against the walls. Amara's grip tightened on her wheelchair, her nails digging into the arms. She felt the weight of the gun still resting on the desk beside her. She could see her grandmother's staff glowing faintly, pulsing with an energy that belonged to something older than any will or inheritance. She could hear Deshawn's ragged breathing behind her, waiting for her to decide if he was ally or enemy. The choice was hers. Slowly, Amara reached out. Her hand hovered between the gun and her grandmother's staff. Two paths, two destinies, violence or wisdom, vengeance or legacy. The fire cracked against the windows. The air grew thick with smoke. She closed her fingers around, and the chapter ended in the roar of fire and the silence of her choice, hidden for now, waiting to reveal its consequence. The fire clawed at the walls, smoke curling into the room like a living thing hungry for breath. The heat pressed against their faces, the air growing thin. Every pair of eyes turned to Amara, waiting for her to decide. Her hand hovered only a moment longer, trembling between iron and wood, between the gun and her grandmother's staff. Then, with a sharp inhale, she pushed the weapon away. The steel clattered against the desk. Her fingers closed firmly around the staff. A hush fell over the room. Mama Adaisy's eyes glistened with approval. "You have chosen well, child. The ancestors walk with you." Cheek's laughter boomed through the flames outside. "A stick? You think that can stop me?" But as Amara lifted the staff, something stirred in her veins. Heat surged through her body, not the heat of fire, but the heat of power, of bloodline, of inheritance deeper than money. The carvings etched into the wood glowed faintly, humming like a song remembered. For the first time since the accident, she felt strong. "Cheek," she called, her voice clear and fierce, carrying through the storm. "You cannot burn me out. I am fire's daughter. I am Obasi's blood, and I will not be broken." She struck the staff against the floor. The sound cracked through the air like thunder. The flames at the window bent backward, as though a great wind had pushed them. Smoke swirled violently, sucked out into the night. The fire that threatened to consume the office hissed, sputtered, and died as if doused by unseen rain. A stunned silence followed. Outside, Cheeky stumbled back, his eyes wide. No, this isn't possible. You..." His words broke off into a scream as lightning ripped across the sky, striking the ground so close that the earth itself shook. He fell, dropping his fuel canister, his arrogance scattered into the mud. Inside, the room filled with fresh air, the choking smoke gone. Everyone stared at Amara, their fear replaced by awe. The crippled woman who had been abandoned, betrayed, and mocked now sat at the center of the storm, wielding the legacy of her bloodline. Deshawn stepped forward slowly, his voice low. "Amara, I didn't know you carried this in you." His eyes brimmed with regret. "Let me stand with you now. Let me earn back what I threw away." She looked at him long and hard, her face unreadable. Memories of nights in pain, of meals alone, of betrayal burned in her chest. Yet in that moment, she saw not just the man who left, but the man fate had revealed as family, bound to her inheritance whether she liked it or not. "You will stand," she said coldly, "but not with me. You will stand accountable." Her words cut deep. Deshawn's face fell, but he nodded. For once, he did not argue. Attorney Okoye cleared his throat nervously, breaking the silence. "Ms. Johnson, what do we tell the courts? What of your cousin, of your husband? Of this inheritance?" Amara tightened her grip on the staff. Her voice was calm, steady, commanding. "We tell them the truth, that the wealth my grandfather left will not destroy us. It will build, but only if it is guarded with wisdom, not greed." Her grandmother placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice like warm rain. "Now you understand, child. The money was never the true inheritance. Strength was. Patience was. Wisdom was. That is what Obasi wanted you to learn." From outside came the sound of sirens, growing louder as neighbors called for help. Cheek's figure was nowhere to be seen, vanished into the storm, leaving only the echo of his rage. Amara straightened in her chair, staff in hand, the glow fading but the strength still pulsing through her. For the first time since the crash, she did not feel crippled. She felt powerful. Cheek's fire had not burned her down, it had revealed her. She turned to those still trembling in the room. This fight is not over, but it is mine now. And I promise you, neither blood, nor betrayal, nor fire will steal what I was born to carry. The storm outside began to quiet, as if the sky itself bowed to her resolve. And so the story closed, with Amara no longer a victim, but a matriarch in the making, standing at the dawn of her true inheritance, one not of dollars alone, but of destiny. Viewers, imagine being in Amara's place, betrayed by your husband, hunted by your cousin, yet suddenly holding both 100 Mitru inheritance and the power of your ancestors. Would you have chosen the gun or the staff? Do you think Amara was right to reject Deshawn's plea for forgiveness? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more powerful stories like this one.